I'm going to do is provide a background. The new measures for implementation as part of the current statutory instrument 605 2017 and 529 2020, and the consultation phase for the next nitrates action programme. Okay, we can move on. I suppose, look at, I'm not going to summarise again. We're in a trend of declining water quality, and there are pressures from agriculture. They've all been identified from the various speakers here this morning. I suppose the priorities from a policy perspective, there are targets in place to meet Water Framework Directive targets to 2027. And also there are European strategies in place, such as farm to fork and biodiversity strategies to reduce nutrient losses by 50% to 2030. So look, I suppose as a framework and a roadmap, those timelines are there, and the qualifications in terms of the quality standards are there that in relation to where Ireland has to meet. Okay. I've mentioned obviously the Green Deal and the farm to fork and biodiversity strategies. While proposals at this stage and still have to be ironed out, they are a clear signal from the Commission in relation to where member states need to go. The two categories I've mentioned, one around the 50% reduction in nutrient loss, but the second obviously a 20% cut in the use of fertilizer. So they're key targets, good to have, I suppose, in terms of the back of a mind, in terms of where things have to go, but difficult from any perspective in terms of achieving. Okay. So look at, just to summarise some of Jenny's and what Jenny has provided earlier, we've two maps, and I suppose it's always good to give an illustration of where we see the impacts from a water quality perspective from either nitrate or phosphorus. The map on the left, in terms of nitrate, if you could draw a line along the southeast of the country, you'll see the pressures there. Obviously, those points in red are those where standards have disimproved. The yellow is obviously they're holding their own, but and then blue, obviously there's improvements. I suppose, look at, there are pressures in the south and southeast that has been identified from both speakers early on from a nitrogen perspective. Risky soils, the management of nitrogen and phosphorus is very important, and as Jenny mentioned, the right measure in the right place is something that will become more apparent as we go through cycles. If we look at river phosphorus changes as well, it's more scattered, obviously, than the nitrate story, similar to the science that we do know. Obviously, in more saturated type soils, the risk of losing phosphorus is potentially there through overland flow. And as you can see with the red dots, obviously, it has an impact for all farmers, both intensive and extensive farmers across Ireland. Okay. It's been mentioned a few times about the gross net nutrient budgets. At a national level, Ireland have to submit to Eurostat on an annual basis the accumulation of what's going into the system, obviously from a livestock perspective, the number of cows, the chemical fertilizers in, all inputs into the system, and what goes out, whether it be milk and meat. What we've seen over the last number of years, I have 2016 up to 16 data here submitted to the Commission, and we've only recently submitted 17 and 18 data. Our gross nutrient budget have been increasing over the last number of years. So there's more going into the system than there's coming out. As a metric, I suppose it's one the Commission do look at. If you look at the farm to fork, they will set a baseline somewhere in terms of where we're going to have to set our standards for future measures. And the trajectory is high. In 17 and 18, it's still increasing. So the losses to the environment are still there from a production perspective, and they have to be looked at. This represents nitrogen, but the phosphorus budget mirrors what's going on here, and the surpluses remain increasing. Okay, thank you. So look at, just to acknowledge, look, in terms of supporting water quality, look, farmers have supported baseline requirements in terms of water quality. There's a lot of measures on the ground there that have been implemented by farmers, and that has to be acknowledged. We have a Water Framework Directive in place. There are targets in place to 2027, and that timeline is there from, we missed the 2021 targets, we will miss the 2021 targets, and our next site is around 2027. The Nitrates Directive is the main agricultural measure which aims to protect waters from sources of NMP from agricultural sources. So that is the main measure in place through the Nitrates Action Programme, where measures are identified at a national level to improve and protect water quality. We have to acknowledge that there is a sustainable use directive there, and we can't forget the impact of pesticides used on farms. So there is other potential issues at farm level, such as pesticides, that have to be recognised. From a cross-compliance perspective, look, we have to acknowledge there are baseline regulatory requirements there for all farmers that have cap payments, and the strategic management requirements, or SMRs, are there to look after those. Obviously, SMR1 is the key requirement under cross-compliance for farmers to achieve baseline targets. So look, they are there, and it does set the bar in terms of compliance. From a support perspective, Eddie has mentioned the Teagasc ACP, which is now funded to the tune of $2.5 million a year. So the agriculture catchments program is there since 2006, and what it does do, it evaluates all measures within the regulations that are there to evaluate their effectiveness at farm level. ASAP was mentioned, and Paul mentioned it at the outset of this discussion. And yes, it's a voluntary program targeted at 190 priority areas for action in Ireland to focus at 5,000 farmers. It's a new collaboration between government departments and industry, and one that has to be welcomed to work with farmers and at an individual basis to improve things on the ground. And I think it's something that has to be nurtured over the next number of years. It is supported to 2021, and there's a commitment there in the programme from government as well. So it's something that is positive in terms of farmer engagement. Look, we must recognise also the rural development programme and what funding is there through the various programmes, such as the long-term environmental schemes, the TAM schemes, the knowledge transfer programmes, but also, I suppose, the new EIPs that are currently there. CAP, I suppose, hasn't been mentioned a lot, but I suppose in the next round of CAP, the EIPs will be influential in terms of developing results-based payment schemes. They're the models that are there that will test future interventions at farm level, and there's something that will guide policy into the future. Okay. Look, it's important to reflect, I suppose, how farming and the livestock sector has changed since post-quota era, I suppose, and looking at where primarily dairy farming is now sits within the spectrum of the whole livestock sector. And we do now know, if you run along the second last column of this graph, those farmers operating above 170. There's now currently 11,000 odd of these farmers in the country. They farm 9%, or they're equivalent to 9% of the farms, operating roughly 600 odd thousand hectares of land, but have 33% of the livestock. So they're a significant cohort within the whole livestock sector. And what we see is a significant divergence, I suppose, in how the livestock sector looks. You know, there are the vast majority of farmers, 65% of farmers now operate under 85 kilos of organic nitrogen. And then we have 9% of farmers who have 33% of livestock. So there is a clear divergence in terms of the systems that are now being operated at farm level within Ireland. Okay, thank you. So look, to bring us through the regulations, there are nitrates regulations in place. The Nitrates Action Programme is there. The Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage is the lead authority in terms of these regulations. And I suppose we work in collaboration with the government partners to deliver for agriculture. Obviously, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine implements and operates the nitrates derogation under SI 65 of 2018. We currently have a nitrates action programme in place until the end of 2021. So the review of that consultation has commenced, and I'll just cover it a little bit later. Okay, thank you. So in terms of the nitrates derogation review, I think we have to note that from last year, Ireland undertook a voluntary review of the derogation last year. And what that set out to do was to examine further opportunities for derogation farmers to improve efficiencies and continue to reduce their environmental footprint with particular regard to water, climate and air quality. While the specificities around the review obviously pertains around water quality, you know, achieving as many co-benefits as you can in relation to the identification of measures is important for Ireland, because where we can achieve, for example, low emission was mentioned earlier as a key measure. You know, we know from an air quality perspective what abatement it can have, but from a nutrient use efficiency and the recycling of organic manures, we know improvements it can make at farm level. Okay, So look, at just quickly run down through. You're probably all aware of the various rules around the derogation for 2020, but in 2020 there's been a compulsory liming programme introduced. Low emission spreading of slurry, obviously, well, compulsory from next year was introduced from the 15th of April this year, and obviously the reduction of crude protein in concentrates was an area. And I suppose for yourselves to note, I suppose efficiency is key in terms of delivering improvements. Absolute use of nitrogen, I suppose, has to be looked at as something to the future about reducing, and we're looking at every source of nitrogen within the system in order to make improvements. So you'll probably wonder why crude protein comes in. It's still, at the end of the day, another source of nitrogen within the system, and it has to be focused on in our current systems to reduce that need and excess, or reduce the need to lose more N within the system. The additional measures there were increased use of clover in swards, obviously training, as Paul mentioned at the start, now mandatory for derogation farmers, especially in nutrient use efficiency. And where a farmer is not equipped with the grass measure, he must complete training by the end of 2021. There has been a biodiversity measure introduced for this year, and obviously we're now starting to look at land eligibility and have now limited commonage and rough grazing land to just 170 in terms of the stock carrying capacity, and they're not allowed the differential at 250 for the derogation. So I suppose in terms of policy timelines, it's important to recognise from a timing perspective where Ireland Inc. is from both a climate, water quality, but also a CAP perspective. We know the climate bill is currently there, and agriculture is bringing Ag Climatise and is hoping to launch it shortly. The third cycle of the River Basin Management Plan is to commence from January 2022. So there will be consultation on agriculture measures within this. Obviously, agriculture within this is the key, and the Nitrates Action Programme is the key element within this in terms of improving the standards through the River Basin Management Plan and the Water Framework Directive targets. Both align with each other, both the River Basin Management Plan and the Nitrates Action Programme, so there will be key linkage between both, and I suppose big asks between both in terms of making these achievements. Looking at a little bit down the line, but I suppose guiding, future interventions, especially if baseline requirements through the Nitrates Action Programme are enhanced in the next programme. You know, it may impact in terms of what we can fund, whether it's through the Common Agricultural Policy or any new green architecture, whether it be the Eco Scheme and long-term environmental schemes. But these new programmes are due to be in place in January 2023. There is planned a transitional period, you're probably all aware, for the next 2 years. So there will be additional interventions within those periods, but the guidance through both the policy cycles will help to inform these interventions. I suppose it's important to recognise the linkages between the policies, and I suppose if we can look across all these policies, there is the key theme from what I see from water quality perspective is a reduction in nutrient losses. We have to look at nitrogen primarily and also look at phosphorus. Sediment obviously is coming through as a key area that needs to be looked at also, but it can inform policy interventions in the future, but it's important to yourselves to note that there are linkages between all these policies going forward. Thank you. So look at, just to take you through the key new measures for implementation next year. There are 2 new stocking rate requirements, there are a number of new requirements that are applicable to various stocking rate depending on your farming situation. So if you're farming currently outside derogation but have a whole farm stocking rate excluding any exports, so if you are exporting to stay out of derogation, for example, there are a couple of new requirements to introduce from next year. If you have a grassland stocking rate excluding N exports, so you have also some new requirements next year. So I'll go through them in more detail and additional slides, but from next year, the use of low emission liming programme and a reduction to 15% crude protein is required for whole farm stocking rate greater than or equal to 170 excluding exports. For those on grassland stocking rates, obviously the fencing of water courses and setback distances for water troughs will now be applicable for next year. And all farms from next year have to modify farm roadways to reduce the impact of any potential, whether it be sediment or nutrient loss to waters, not just watercourse, but waters to include dry drains. Okay. Additionally, the annual nutrient excretion rate for livestock has changed for the dairy cow. So from the 1st to the 1st, 2021, the dairy cow has now moved to 89 kilos of organic N per hectare. So farmers must recognise that this is an additional requirement next year, and they must obviously look at that from their own business perspective in terms of the stock carrying capacity of their land. Okay. In terms of farm roadways, look, it's for every farmer. It's applicable to all holdings regarding of stocking rate. The key, I suppose, focus of it is the prevention of direct discharge from farm roadways under Article 1720. So, and it states there shall be no direct runoff of soil water from farm roadways to waters from the 1st of January 2021. The occupier of such a holding shall comply with a minimum specification for farm roadways as set out as S199, and that was put up on our website in July 2020. The definition is per the SI 605 of 17, which is waters. So this includes all water bodies on the farm, whether it be a water course, dry drain, etc. So all roadways along these features must be as a minimum cambered out, or adopt various measures within the spec that reduces the impact of any potential losses to water bodies. I suppose for yourselves, it's important to, I suppose, bring it back to basics. Look at what you have from a roadway perspective. See what needs to be done. We're not asking farmers to put in big construction or any type of big physical structures to prevent, but we are saying put in practical measures whereby we can reduce or reduce the impact of any losses to these type of waters. Okay. I've mentioned it briefly earlier. Obviously, there are measures coming in for those farmers operating above 170 organic N, excluding exports. So from next year, for implementation purposes, it'll be based on your previous year's stocking rate. So when we go out on the ground in 2021, we will be looking at 2020 stocking rate for the assessment of these measures. The use of low emission spreading of slurry will become compulsory for these farmers after the 15th of April 2021. So any slurry remaining on the holding after this date must be used by low emission. There is a liming program required for these farmers. So on inspection, if a farmer has either a nutrient management plan or soil samples on farm, and those farms need lime, we'll need to see evidence of that lime being spread on that holding. We're not asking farmers to go and soil sample. If they haven't got any soil samples next year, that's fine. But I suppose you can see the trajectory and the policy direction in relation to where this is going into the future. From an efficiency perspective, from the use of inputs into the system, whether it be nitrogen or phosphorus, you know, unless we have an optimum pH to utilize all these nutrients, you know, we're not achieving optimum nutrient use efficiency. And finally, obviously, there's a maximum crude protein next year of concentrates for livestock at grass of 15% as fed from the 1st of April to the 15th of September 2021. We know from an excretion rate of the dairy cow, for example, 1 unit of crude protein reduction can potentially reduce the excretion rate of the dairy cow by 1 as well. So there's a clear ratio there whereby this is an easy measure for farmers to adopt on the ground. It's potentially a cheaper option in terms of reducing crude protein at grass, but also it's an easier option to implement at farm level. Okay. For grassland farmers operating with a grassland stocking rate above 170, they are required to exclude the exclusion of bovines from watercourses. So where bovine livestock have direct access to water courses, sorry, there's a type there, from watercourses from the holding, a fence shall be placed at least 1.5 from the top of the riverbank or water's edge by the 1st of January 2021. Now, it will be permissible to move livestock across a watercourse to an isolated land parcel where necessary, provided both sides of the watercourse are fenced. We're not asking farmers to put in culverts or bridges by any means in terms of crossing watercourses. If farmers have to cross a watercourse on a daily basis, what we're saying is put a fence both sides to ensure that livestock don't wander up and down the watercourse. We know from work recently around the completed COSAN project within the EPA around cattle drinking access points and the potential impacts of those. We see that sediment loss can cause a problem as well as nutrient loss, but the levels of VTEC also within the river can cause issues. So this measure is targeted to that. Additionally, in terms of fencing, any current fence that's there that's not out 1.5 meters along a watercourse has to be moved out 1.5. Now, how these can actually be identified, the OSI have a 1:5,000 scale map that identifies watercourses. So any line within that map identified as a feature that is continuous in nature, that is a continuous blue line irrespective of width. So whether it's a wide or a thin blue line, and once it's continuously colored blue, have to be fenced. There are other features within those maps that are broken or dotted blue lines. They don't need to be fenced, but anything continuous, irrespective of width, has to be fenced for this measure. Okay, in terms of drinking water points, there are setback distances with supplementary drinking water points set out in the regulation. So in the case of holdings identified in sub-article 18, supplementary drinking points may not be located within 20 meters of surface waters from the 1st of January 2021. Surface waters are identified as watercourses identified in the 1:5,000 scale map. And if, as I mentioned, as part of the fencing, if they're identified within that you have to fence, and you've also got a drinking point along that water course, you must move it out 20 meters from that. Okay. So finally, in terms of the review of the Nitrates Action Programme, the consultation for the programme has commenced. I've provided the link to the housing link. We're currently moving to a different system, and it wasn't easy to get the link, but the link is available here at housing.gov.ie, and the consultation document that is there is on the system for review. The closing date for submissions is the 15th of January 2021. The review of the Nitrates Action Programme, it will be facilitated by a nitrates expert group made up of government agencies, government departments, and also members of Teagasc. And it's important that the consultation document was drafted on the basis of identifying areas where we sought views, whether it be from a scientific or a research perspective. That doesn't preempt any outcome of a particular review. We're looking for views from all stakeholders. Obviously, farmers are very important to this process, but anything in terms of considerations that need to be taken as part of this review will be considered. After the initial consultation, a second consultation will happen to refine that consultation further, and it's planned for the end of Q1 2021. With the ambition, then the Nitrates Action Programme and measures or interventions that may need to be developed will have to happen next summer. Aligned with all this, obviously, we'll have to negotiate with the Commission around the next Nitrates Action Programme and also around Ireland's derogation. So it will be working in tandem. The Commission meet through the Nitrates Action Committee on a quarterly basis. The next meeting is planned for next week, and it will happen again March, June, etc. So look, we'll have to go to the Commission, provide the current state of play in terms of water quality. Jenny has outlined, and from the research and science based on the ACP, it outlines where we are. We have a declining trend. We will be presenting what science we have to the Commission in terms of our current position, and we will be negotiating another programme on the basis of what we can do to reduce, I suppose, the environmental footprint of agriculture on the environment. Look, this is not just about one single sector within farming. This is about all farming. Both Jenny and Eddie have provided a good overview in relation to where we see the impacts happening, and I suppose the management of nitrogen, And phosphorus is going to be a key area in any of the next program that comes through. And managing risky soils, and I think the identification of soils that are risky is something that needs due consideration in any process. So look at I think that's it from me. Look at thanks for letting me come today and discuss this with you. And look, we welcome any questions in relation to it. Thanks.